to Live Free Legal. I'm Tiffany Lesnik, founder, survivor, and domestic violence attorney. And today's guest is someone I admire deeply, Judge Ashleigh Parker. She is a judge in Wake County in Raleigh, North Carolina District Court. Not only is she an incredible advocate for victims of violence, children, and also heavily involved in community programs. I don't know how you ever sleep. She's also a survivor herself. She knows what it's like to walk into court terrified, and now she sits on the bench making decisions that change lives. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and today we're going to hear her powerful story and learn how you can be a part of putting more trauma-informed judges on the bench. So, Judge Parker, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me, Tiffany. I appreciate it.
And I know in talking with victims of domestic violence, they're terrified of coming to court. Mm-hmm. And they're terrified of going in front of a judge. And I think it brings them so much peace to know that judges are normal people,
Absolutely.
Right? Can you tell us a little bit about your backstory? What inspired you to become a judge in the first place?
Sure. So I graduated from law school in 2012, thought I was going to be a prosecutor. That was always my dream. My dad was one and retired. He was actually the first black prosecutor on the western side of the state of North Carolina. So I thought I was just going to be like him. Yeah. And so I started out in the Wake County DA's office, thought that was going to be it for me. Felt like that's where God had put me until he said, nope, I have something else for you. And so one day I looked down the audience and realized the audience looked like me. Mm-hmm. However, there was not a representation of a black female in criminal district court. We had one black female district court judge, Judge Christian, yes, who was in family court across the street. So for context, in Wake County, we have two separate courthouses, yes, one for family and civil and one for criminal. And so we did not have that representation in criminal court. Mm-hmm. And so literally it felt like God said to me, Ashleigh, I called you for more. And I'm 2 years out of law school. I'm like, no, God, I'm fine right here. But at that point, he and I had already gone back and forth and already knew, when he tells you to do something, you need to move. And he laughs at our plans. So I left my dream job, went to the Attorney General's office where I represented the DMV. I did that for 3 years. And then in 2017, after one failed attempt of getting on the bench, I was appointed at the end of 2017. And so I've had the opportunity to serve for the last almost 8 years.
Wow.
In Wake County.
That's awesome. And I love what you said, like when God tells you to move, you move.
You've got to move.
And I think so many victims of domestic violence, I do feel like they have that calling on their heart, but they just feel paralyzed.
Yes.
So tell us about your survivor experience, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been on the bench since, like I said, 2017. I was married in 2012. We separated in 2022. So I was married for 10 years. I got married very young. I was 24, fresh out of law school. We have 2 children that are 9 and 4 at this point. And so what I will say is my domestic violence story is different in the sense that it was not physical. It is not what people would typically consider domestic violence. Mm-hmm. But people don't realize that there are other forms, right? And mine specifically was emotional abuse. Right. And so throughout years of us being married, I did not realize it until we were in a counseling session with our pastor that the passive-aggressive acts, I was feeling like I was walking on eggshells. Mm-hmm. The silent treatment that he was giving me, I didn't really realize what it was, but then he actually said, that's emotional abuse. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like you put a word to what I was feeling. You put a title, something what I was feeling. And it was crazy because I didn't really understand it until about 2020. So for years, I have been serving in a domestic violence courtroom, hopefully helping other people. That was the goal, right? Is now that I'm a judge is to assist and to help. But then didn't even realize that I was living myself, because a lot of times you're in that cloud and you're in that fog and you don't understand it. But that wasn't necessarily the catalyst for me leaving the way that I did, or to your point, when God says move, you have to move. But I did not realize that that was something that had affected me so deeply. Mm-hmm. But the way that it made me feel so small, right, the way that it made me feel unheard, the way it made me feel like I can't come to you directly and say, hey, these are the things I've got going on and let's have a conversation about it. Instead, it's 2 weeks of not talking.
Right.
2 weeks of no conversation or whatever else, or the little nitpicky passive-aggressive things that were really, really challenging for me. And so when I did leave my marriage after learning of his affair, the cloud was lifted. God was very clear on my assignment, mm-hmm, that number one, I needed to heal. Mm-hmm. I cannot put everything on my ex-husband by any means. There were things that I did. I was codependent. which led to having control issues of trying to control what he was doing, even in a loving way, but still trying to say, hey, let's do it this way, or, I was in charge of the finances because I was better than that, and that could feel like financial abuse in a way, probably for him, in a sense that I'm like, hey, what's happening here, right? And so I had to learn my rejection issues and my abandonment issues led me to tolerate things that I never should have tolerated. And then maybe things with him where he shouldn't have tolerated things from me. And so whenever that cloud was lifted and I was able to actually look in at myself, God said, your job, your ministry is to help other individuals to deal with this, right? And to expose this. And the first way that you have to do it is through your work. And so I created a course for judges called Navigating Cases When Abuse is Present. And in that course, I teach judges about other forms of domestic violence other than just physical. And so we talk about litigation abuse, spiritual abuse, immigration abuse, financial abuse. We talk very heavily, I have a psych degree, talk very heavily on emotional abuse and narcissistic abuse. And in that slide, I actually, at the very end of it, I said, what do survivors look like? And I put a picture of myself up there. I own where I was with it because so many individuals feel like because you're in a position or because you have a title that this can't happen to you.
Right.
And it can. And in so many ways, and in that course, the biggest thing that I really try to inform judges about is that we should not rank abuse on a scale.
Right.
Because you're not seeing it physically does not mean that it's not affecting somebody. And we have to honor that and understand that as when we are issuing these domestic violence restraining orders, there's anything that exerts power and control is abuse.
Right.
And we need to be aware of that because we may be the first one who put a name on it.
Right. So how did we get access, or how did judges get access to the course that you're teaching?
So I actually taught it at a family court conference last year, and then I taught it at the spring or the summer judges conference this year.
Okay.
I've also taught it at multiple child support conferences. I've tailored it for child support offices since a lot of times that is very high conflict.
Right.
They are hearing everything I always tell them. They're the first line of sometimes of a therapist for individuals that are going through this. And so I wanted them to be able to identify it as well. So I've had the opportunity to teach it in Indiana as well as at the North Carolina Child Support Conference.
That's awesome. Do you have a workbook or curriculum that you've created that goes along with the training?
It's just a PowerPoint. I'm happy to share it. And like I said, I list out the different forms, and also having people think and be open-minded to something that you may not think was abuse really could be actually a form of abuse.
Right. You sit as a district court judge in domestic violence court, correct? The majority of cases that you see in domestic violence court, would you classify those more as coercive control, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, harassment than you would physical abuse? Would you say they're about equal, that physical abuse is more predominant? What are you seeing in domestic violence court?
That's such a great question. So I would say, unfortunately, 85% of the cases that come through there are not legitimate situations. Domestic violence court, specifically here in Wake County, is the quickest courtroom that you can get to a judge.
Right.
So people utilize that courtroom to handle a custody issue, a landlord-tenant issue, so many different other issues that it is not used for because they just want to get in front of a judge. So we're filtering through a lot of things that do not rise to the level of a 50B restraining order or 50C restraining order. The 15%, I would say, is the part that when you break down that it actually is legitimate domestic violence. And what I will say is that the bulk of what we see are, number one, physical abuse, because it's obvious. They've probably gone to a hospital. They probably had somebody to see it, something along those lines. But it's usually never the first time. It's usually happened multiple times on multiple occasions. So the first thing we see, I would say, is physical. The next thing we would say are verbal threats, and harassment would be the next thing. The financial abuse, the emotional abuse, the other lesser known spiritual abuse, the lesser known forms of abuse are typically not brought into court because most of the time people cannot put a name on it. And they also don't feel like it's either that big of a deal, or they may feel like, who would believe me, or they may not feel like this rises to that high standard.
Right.
And this is why I really go out of my way to make sure I'm informing judges and anyone to not rank abuse on a scale, because it's not just the one thing, it's usually a lot of things.
Right.
And so all of those things, the accumulation of that, once again, to exert power and control is abusive. And it's still something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. I know when I first left my abusive ex-husband, I didn't know that I was in an abusive relationship. I just knew something was wrong, right? It didn't feel right. And that was before I went to law school. And I actually had to have law enforcement tell me, you can go file for a protective order. I didn't even know what a protective order was. And so there was a whole gamut of things that I was going through. But there's definitely education and I think an awareness that women have to get the full understanding of the legal remedies that are available to them and what abuse really is, how the law defines abuse, and to get that help for themselves that they need.
I think you brought up a great point, Tiffany, as far as things not feeling right? And I think that's where like the emotional abuse comes in, because you really don't understand the toll that it takes on your self-esteem, that it takes on your presence. You're just drained and you just don't know why, and you're just not yourself and you can't figure it out. Just being in that environment can really affect you and affect everything else that you do from there. Now you might be depressed. Now you may have anxiety. Like, I feel flustered because of this situation, or I don't even have this conversation with this person because I don't know how they're going to react.
Right.
And even yelling or throwing something or punching a wall beside somebody's head, like things that people would say that's not that big of a deal because he's not hitting me or she's not hitting me, is still problematic. And I want to be very clear that when we're talking about this, obviously there are men that are also victims, women that are victims. Like there are those in same-sex relationships. I see all of it.
Right.
I see all of it.
So I want to kind of inform our audience about the process for becoming a judge in North Carolina. How do you become a judge in North Carolina?
So judges are elected, and so district court judges, who are the judges who handle family court cases, handle juvenile cases. I'm also one of our foster care judges. District court, misdemeanors, lower level felonies, those type of things. We are elected on a 4-year term. So every 4 years we're elected. There are 20 of us currently. And then Superior Court and the Court of Appeals, as well as the Supreme Court, are on 8-year terms.
Okay. And the majority of states nationwide do judicial elections as well. Not every state does, but the majority of states do. So it's very important, if the issue of domestic violence is important to you, that you get to know who your candidates are before you vote in the elections. In our state, it used to be that district court judges were nonpartisan, or they did not have to put their political affiliation on the ballot, and that has now changed.
And we also run in districts.
That's correct.
We used to be countywide, and now we are district-based. So there's only a small subset of the county that votes for me versus countywide.
The entire county, right. How important do you think it is to vote on a nonpartisan basis? Do you think party matters when it comes to district court judges at the district court level?
I don't think that it should matter, in the sense that we are unbiased, we are fair, we are impartial. If someone stands in front of me, it doesn't matter what their party affiliation is, and it shouldn't matter what mine is. At the end of the day, my job is to take an oath and to follow the law, and that's what I try to do. I always say there's 2 versions of me. I can split myself in half. There's Ashleigh, and then there's Judge Parker, and there's a lot of things that Ashleigh doesn't agree with, but Judge Parker took an oath to follow. And there are certain things that I have to stand on because of this oath, versus even my own personal beliefs on something. And so with that being said, that's why I don't think that personal belief matters as far as your partisanship. You really should just be making sure that you're treating everybody fairly and equally.
Right. I talk to folks all the time, and I tell them, go into the courtroom. I'm in front of Republican judges. I'm in front of Democratic judges. I'm rarely in front of independent judges, just because of how our system is set up here. But to me, it really makes no difference. There are certain judges on the Democrat side of things that I love, and there's certain Republican judges that I'm like, I'm not so loving. And then there's certain Republican judges that I absolutely love. Honestly, what I think it comes down to is experience. Right? I think you need to look at, has this judge been married? Does this judge have children? What type of community training or resources, involvement do they have? Are they out there engaged in the community? Are they aware of what is actually going on with issues like poverty, drug use, juvenile delinquency? How are their decisions impacting our children and our families? Because really, at the district court level, that's where the voters are really going to be impacted by decisions that judges are making.
Absolutely. Right? I always tell people all the time, we are the people's servants, and my job is not to judge anybody. It's a title, it is not my job. My job is to help. Right? So I think it's very important for people to understand that the courthouse is the people's house. So you have every right to come down, observe, right? And those things that are important to you, seeing how individuals handle those type of things that are important to you, I think is vital. As a foster care judge, it has been one of the most emotionally challenging courtrooms that I've ever been in, but yet most powerful, as far as just hopefully making an impact and hopefully reunifying families and children into safe spaces. But yes, you definitely want to make sure that you know who they are. I think it's very important to make sure that they are culturally competent, that they are aware of different cultures.
Yes.
That is something that you express to them, understanding the community in which we serve in. I definitely believe that it's important to be out in the community so that I know what those issues are and what the needs are, and hopefully can effectuate that in a positive way, in a healthy way.
Right. Even when it comes down to issues of domestic violence and protection, or child support, or custody, if you have teenagers who maybe get caught smoking marijuana, those types of issues, those are going to be heard in front of your district court judges, so it's very important to know who you're voting for. Mm-hmm. So how can our viewers, how do they know, how can we research? So you get on Wikipedia, or I can't remember, Wikipedia. There's websites that are out there that give you some basic information about the judges and who we're voting for, but it's not always
right.
They're somewhat politically benign responses. How can we do a deeper dive into the candidates to figure out what their experience is, what they stand for, do they align with the issues that matter to us? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Well, I have a website, so definitely somebody can go to my website, but not everyone has a website. I have Facebook, I have Instagram, I have LinkedIn, so I'm very active on those things. Some of my colleagues are not. And so I think the biggest thing, though, would be word of mouth. Mm-hmm. I mean, calling an attorney, and saying, hey, this is something, you do this type of law that I'm very passionate about. What do you think of these individuals that are on my ballot? Those kind of things. I know people have no problem asking clerks and asking deputies and asking probation officers, anybody that's in that system, I think will give you more of a really deeper perspective on these individuals and how they serve. Because it's one thing to do something in the community and be all a shining star online or whatever. It's another thing to be in the courtroom and what that actually looks like and how you treat people. And so if you really want the facts, I think you should definitely talk to the folks in the courtroom.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I'll say about reviews, particularly online, is always be careful, because sometimes you get a really disgruntled defendant, abuser, who's going to go on a rampage and is going to say some really horrible things. Look at the context. Who's saying it? What are they saying? This is someone that you've taken their children away from them and they're angry. Who's saying it and what's the context behind that? And I do think it's important to look at, do they have a family? How old are they? What types of things are you involved in? So yeah, get on Facebook, get on your website. See if they put in the effort to create a website or a Facebook account or social media. How important is that to them to get that information out there? And if you can't find anything about a potential candidate, that's probably a bad sign. I don't know what you think to that.
I can't say. I think that everybody's kind of does their, their own thing, their own way, whatever works for them. As a millennial, I'm 37, about to be 38. And so for me, it's social media and those type of things have always been something that are easy for me. But I'm on a mission, particularly, to change perspective of judges, that we may not look like or do the same things that everybody feels like we should necessarily, but that we are human. That's the biggest thing. I'm human. I've been married and I am a divorcee. That is different seasons of my life. I am a mother. I am a bonus mother. I am growing every day. I'm becoming more of the woman of God that I need to be. The judge that I was in 2017 is not the judge I am in 2025 and will not be the judge I am in, whatever time later. So all of those things are just important to me. But as far as anybody else, whatever works.
Yeah. And so how can our viewers support trauma-informed judges and helping them get into positions on the bench?
Sure. So the Administrative Office of the Courts does all of the training and creates what's called bench cards, which we have on the bench, and those type of things for us. And so they are huge on us being trauma-informed. They created a task force for that. Another thing that they created was adverse childhood experiences, ACE training as well for judges, which is just phenomenal. So that we can figure out the impact that our decisions have, the impact that all of these have on children. Ultimately, we want to keep them out of the criminal justice system, so we really want to get them early if they're having issues and try to resolve those with mental health services and really help to try to rebuild the family. But being trauma-informed is very important to the state. It's something that I'm proud that I have an opportunity to help teach also in that course. It's very important for us to understand that when somebody comes into that courtroom and comes in that space, it's very scary. Like I said, as going through my own court cases, sitting on that witness stand, I know God had me do that because he wanted me to see what it felt like.
Right.
And experience that, because I'm like, why am I here? And he said, do you trust me? I want you to be better. And this is how you're going to be better because now you're going to understand what it feels like.
Right.
One thing that I do for our ex parte hearings, which are the one-side hearings where people come in on one side, I don't wear my robe. So if you come in the afternoon or, I'm doing an ex parte hearing, I'm dressed like this or whatever I'm wearing because I want to disarm and help them understand that this is a safe space for us to have this conversation. Once it's a full hearing, obviously we're in full robe, but also my deputy might be sitting. There's not creating an atmosphere, right, where people can feel comfortable is very important whenever you're specifically dealing with domestic violence.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. It's so great that you do that. First of all, tell us what your website is.
Oh, judgeashleigh.com, and I spell my name Ashleigh, Ashleigh, like Raleigh.
We're going to put that on the screen, and we'll also put that in the comments below so you can find out more about Judge Parker. And then when are you up for re-election?
Not until 2028.
Okay, well that's great. That's good to know because we don't want you to have to rerun again. How important is voter turnout to maintaining good judges in our judicial system?
Oh my gosh, it's vital. I think so many people are so worried about what's happening at the federal level that they forget about what's happening at the local level. And so many people forget to turn it over to the back of their ballot. I am in a presidential year, so I have a higher turnout during my years, but people still are not going to the back of the ballot.
Right.
So that's important. And I think a lot of times people just feel like, oh, I don't know, so I'm not going to vote for this. And it is important for you to know because at minimum, it might be a speeding ticket, but you never know, you might be a victim of a crime. Somebody breaking in your car, someone breaking into your home, or heaven forbid, you have a domestic situation where you have to go to court for custody for your children or child support, or you might have a civil dispute or something. There's a high likelihood that you will be in front of a district court judge at some point in your life. And so you definitely want to make sure that you take that time just as much as you invest in all these federal and maybe even legislative races, also understanding like your mayors and your city councils and your judges and those type of things are just as important.
Right. And I think sometimes they're more important. I think especially in really polarizing elections, when we have a Trump or a Biden or whatever, I've been at the polls volunteering and you see people that are just, I'm just voting straight party ticket. They just go down, they don't pay attention at all to their local politicians, which actually the local people make more of the difference in your everyday lives many times than the actual president does.
Board members for your children,
right?
And what's happening in your schools. I mean, you're right.
If you end up with a small charge, a criminal infraction, and you need that judge who has some compassion and understanding and experience, you're going to want to make sure you voted for that person versus someone who has no empathy for other people. So, Judge Parker, I wanted to thank you so much for coming today and being my guest. I also want to thank you for what you're doing for victims of domestic violence and what you do in the community. I see you're out there, you're active. Again, I don't know how you sleep. Thank you for what you're doing for the children in the Abuse, Neglect, and Dependency Court too. So thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with our viewers. I know there's so much fear out there. There's so much fear mongering going on social media right now, especially in the world of narcissism. And then post-litigation separation abuse, women are just really scared and terrified. So this is very, very helpful, more than you know. So thank you. And for all of you out there, I hope you're feeling both informed and empowered by what you've heard today. This was just part one. I've got a two-part series with Judge Parker. And in part two, we're going to go even deeper, talking about the challenges judges face, how they make tough calls, and what you can do to prepare yourself for court. Make sure that you give us a thumbs up, that you subscribe, and click on the notification bell. Make sure you share this episode with someone who needs encouragement today and who needs to hear this. Join us next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. right here on YouTube at Live Free Legal, and we will see you in part two.